Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. One huge problem that a lot of preppers have is figuring out how to store all of their different supplies and gear without looking like they need to be on an episode of Hoarders. Things like food and water take up a whole lot of room, so you have to be smart with how you use your space, especially if you live in something small like an apartment. And one of the most important places to have organized is your pantry, and can rotators can really help with this. This is the Consolidator by Shelf Reliance, and it can hold up to 60 cans. And the nice thing about rotators like this is that they operate on a first in, first out basis. So whenever you pull a can out, you're using the oldest one, so your food storage should always remain fresh. And this particular one, it is expandable. You can buy extra parts for it to make it bigger, or you could even put two separate consolidators together to make a really big one. If you have a larger pantry, then you can build a much larger one yourself into the walls of your pantry. There's a lot of plans online that can help you do this, and many of them are free. Another way that you can organize and store your preps is to use stackable containers. 5-gallon buckets are some of the cheapest options, and you can find them pretty much anywhere. Most preppers use these to store food, but you can store other things in them as well, like a water saver kit that I made in a previous video. But if you do stack those, it is a good idea to place something like a piece of plywood in between the buckets just to take a little bit of strain off of the lids. And you can even use buckets along with some boards to create shelving units. Just make sure that they're stable and don't get so tall that they become unstable and could fall on you. For water, water bricks and aqua bricks are good options. These were specifically designed to be stacked one on top of the other, and it can be done pretty safely since they lock together. A lot of containers like aquatainers aren't designed to be stacked, while others that supposedly are so flimsy that they'll crack if you actually do it. Ammo cans are another good stackable container, and they're good for storing more than just ammo. Like if you have a ham or GMRS radio that you want to protect, they're very well suited for that. And when you are stacking containers, be sure you put the heaviest ones on the bottom and don't stack them up too high because you don't want them to become unstable and then take somebody out. Then aside from stacking, you can also slide things like water bricks or other thin containers beside or behind furniture. There's a lot of things that can also be stored underneath furniture, but if you do that, be sure that it's well sealed. Use some nice sturdy containers because that area can be very, very dusty, which can mess some stuff up. And it's also susceptible to things like water leaks and flooding, so you'll want to have those items protected. Clear plastic totes and other containers work very well for this because you can see what's inside of them, and also they will provide at least some protection from water on the floor and then also dust settling down. Also be sure to use nice big labels so that you can tell exactly what's in those containers. Another good way to free up space for your preps is to store certain items in your garage or attic. Just do your homework and know what you can store in those kinds of places, because certain items aren't going to do very well if they're exposed to a lot of temperature variations and humidity, and in general attics are going to be worse in that regard. Probably the main thing that I store in my garage is tools. These do perfectly fine in that sort of an environment, but you might want to keep an eye on them just to make sure they aren't rusting. And if you live somewhere with really high humidity, maybe just go ahead and put a preemptive, just very thin coat of oil on them to protect them. I tend to use my attic more for things that I don't use all that often, like my camp toilet, and then other things that aren't that temperature sensitive, like my buddy heater I keep in the garage, because I'll use that a few times throughout the year, and it's nice just to be able to get to it when I need it. Other items like animal traps, tarps, and plastic sheeting can also be kept in either a garage or attic. Then there's things like clothes, blankets, and books that can be kept in those kinds of environments, but they need to be protected because they're susceptible to things like water leaks and rodent damage. So once again, keep them in a nice sturdy container. And if you have any inkling that there's some sort of rodent activity going on, like in your attic or garage, go ahead and get rid of that as quickly as possible. Then you also want to be aware of things that you cannot keep in an attic or garage. Food in general shouldn't be kept in those kinds of environments, especially if temperatures get hot during the summer. Basements are a much better option for food storage since the temperature tends to be lower and more stable because it's underground. Other items like medications and batteries are also temperature sensitive and should be kept in the main part of your home whenever possible. Then also avoid keeping anything under pressure like propane bottles or butane canisters anywhere that may experience extreme temperatures. And different kinds of man-made fuel like butane and propane can take up quite a bit of space if you're trying to store it in bulk. So another way that you can save space is to try to get gear that doesn't require man-made fuel sources. While things like propane camp stoves are convenient, and I recommend having one in most cases, they're really not going to be all that useful if you cannot store enough fuel to get you through whatever it is you're preparing for. A rocket stove like this one is probably my favorite off-grid cooking method that doesn't require a man-made fuel source. While that particular one, the EcoZone Versa, can use charcoal briquettes, it's mainly designed to run on natural materials like sticks, and I have a whole bunch of those where I live because we're pretty much smack dab in the middle of a huge forest. Solar cookers can work well also, but they do have a steeper learning curve and they won't work when it's cloudy or overcast because, well, there wouldn't be any sunlight. For power generation, solar options can work well if you're short on space. Most power stations are smaller than their gas counterparts, and while you will need a set of solar panels for longer term use, those store pretty flat. You can probably just shove them behind your couch when they're not in use, and even still, they're going to take up a lot less room than 5 or 6 gas cans. Now, if you're looking for a solar power option, Ecoflow is running a couple of promotions during the month of September, like they're running their Labor Day sale now, and they've also been running their disaster campaign, which runs until the 27th, and you can find links and a discount code in the description below. When it comes to smaller devices, you can reduce the amount of batteries that you have to store by purchasing rechargeable devices. If you have anything that uses regular like AA or AAAs, then you can just pick up rechargeable versions of those, because since you can reuse them over and over again, you're going to need to store less of them than you would their disposable counterparts. Another way that you can free up space for your preps is to get rid of whatever you're not using, and the easiest place for a lot of people to start with that is their pantry or their medicine cabinet. Just go through those and chuck anything that's either really expired or you just have no plan on ever using. And I know there's a lot of stuff out there that is good well beyond the best by date printed on either the bottle or box, but the bottom line is, like, if you have a bottle of medication that is turning yellow and the label is peeling off, and then you also have some like fresher bottles of those available, chuck the old one and get a new one, so that way your stockpile is as fresh as possible. Your closet could be another good place to hit, and while it is good to have as many clothes as you can at your disposal, if you have an old wardrobe that you cannot fit into, and you know that you will probably never be able to fit into again unless you use something like a shoehorn and some ratchet straps to help you squeeze into them, then it might be a good idea just to go ahead and donate those. Then for all the other random junk that you have laying around the house, a garage sale can be a good way to open up some space and then also help you get a little bit extra money that you can either use to pay stuff down or buy more preps. Packing cubes like these are another good way to organize and consolidate your preps. They work really well if you need to organize things like clothing and gear in your different bags and kits, but they can also work well to hold seasonal items when they're not in use. You can put things like wool caps and gloves in one of them so that everything will be together when you need it. Then you can also use things like old backpacks and duffel bags to hold seasonal or specialty clothing, and the advantage of doing that is that if you have them in those kinds of bags, if you have to leave real quickly, then they're already gathered up in one spot so that you can just, get them and go. Pocket organizers also work really well for helping you organize kits and squeeze everything that you need into them. This is the Maxpedition Fatty that I keep in my Get Home bag. It helps me keep all the small odds and ends that I want to have in that kit in their own little special spot. I know where everything's at, and it's a much better option than just throwing all of that stuff into one just little side pocket on the bag and rummaging through it every time I need something. But when it comes to increasing the amount of storage space that you have in your home, probably the best thing to do is to get some shelves. And this is the same principle that a lot of major cities use. When they can't expand outward anymore, they just build upwards. Small plastic shelving units can go pretty much anywhere, including closets. That's what my wife and I did when we lived in the apartment that we had before we got our house, and we just stuck one in the closet, used it to hold our very small collection of preps and some other items, but with those, just don't overload them because the small plastic ones usually don't have a very high weight rating. If you have a garage, then you can get some much larger shelving units that can hold hundreds of pounds of gear and supplies. I personally like wire shelves and use them to hold a lot of the supplies that I use in my videos. And what I like about those kinds of shelves is that they're relatively inexpensive, they're easy to put together, and they also don't gather as much much dust since, there's not as much surface area for that to land on. You can also pick up bookshelves to keep in places like bedrooms or living areas and use them to hold non-preparedness items. And using them for that's going to do two things. First of all, it's going to organize your house as a whole, and that should be the goal. It shouldn't be just to organize your preps, it should be to organize your whole living space. But also, if you have your non-prepper related items front and center in like your living room or in your bedroom, that's going to be what people see. It's not going to be your prepping supplies strewn all over the place, and that's good from an OPSEC standpoint. Also, take advantage of any bare wall space that you may have. This is a shelf that I built into our laundry room to hold some of our preps, and putting one like that together really isn't all that difficult. Larger hardware stores will have supplies like shelving boards and mounting brackets that you can use to build your own custom shelves in your home. You can put those in your laundry room or maybe in your closet above existing shelves. Just be sure that you don't get them too close to light bulbs because that could potentially start a fire. Or you could even build shelves above doorways. And if you ever plan to build your own home, built-in shelving would be a great thing to incorporate in different places. My aunt, for example, has a huge walk-in pantry with nice built-in shelves, and that is definitely something that I want to incorporate in our house later on. Pegboards can be another good option, especially if you have tools that you need to organize or any other items that can be hanged up. Plastic drawer units like this one are very useful for organizing small supplies, and you can find larger ones that'll do a good job holding things like blankets or other mid-size items. If you run out of space inside of your home but you have a yard, then you could always build a shed. There's a lot of pre-made options out there at different price points, although quality does vary widely on those. Or you could just build your own. And if you're somebody who doesn't have maybe a yard at all, or you just have a very small one, then you can get one of those like small sheds that just fit right up against the side of your house, or maybe even a deck box. While those won't hold nearly as much things as larger sheds will, they could get at least some smaller, less temperature sensitive items out of the way so that you can store more important preps inside of your home. Then if you can afford it, you could always rent a storage unit, and you could use that in a couple of different ways. First, you could use it to hold things that you don't want to get rid of but you don't really use all that much, like Christmas decorations. It's just another good way to clear up some space. Or you could also use a storage unit as a cache. Say you have a bug out location. You could find a storage unit maybe somewhere between your home and that location, and you could put some supplies in there. Just be aware that in some situations those might be difficult to get to, especially if it's grid down. You might not be able to get past the gate. So those are things that you do want to take into account when planning that. And I would recommend having that storage unit closer to your house than your bug out location so that you can get to those supplies before things start to get hairy. And you could also just keep some preps at your actual bug out location. Given this location would need to be secure so your preps don't just sprout legs and walk off on their own, and you would want to have a decent amount of supplies still at your home to get you through shorter term situations that don't really warrant bugging out. Then if you have relatives who you'd be meeting up with at that location and they live closer to it than you do, you might want to consider leaving some of your preps with them, so if you have to get out of town real quickly, you can't bring everything with you that you would like to, you'd at least still have some supplies downrange and ready for you when you get there. And even though we should all have a bug out plan, many times bugging in is going to be our best option. So if you'd like to see things that you would need to bug in, then click here. Or if you want to see a list of things that you should do if you know a disaster is heading your way, then click here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.